Okay, stand by 1 second. Okay, you're good to go.
Thank you, and welcome everyone to today's open meeting of the NSB-NSF Commission on Merit Review. My name is Stephen Willard, Chair of this commission, and I'm accompanied by the Commission's Vice Chair, Wanda Ward. The Commission on Merit Review is comprised of members of the National Science Board and the National Science Foundation. Let's start by taking the roll. Roger Beachy.
Here.
Alicia Needler.
Here.
Steve Leith.
Here.
Candace Major. Matt Malkin. Sarah K. McDonald.
Here.
Julia Phillips.
Here.
Scott Stanley.
Here.
Kayvon Stassen.
Here.
Wanda Ward.
Here.
Our NSBO liaisons are Portia Flowers, Ann Bushmiller, and Alexandra Serchel, and our executive secretary is John Adamek. We're also joined by Albert Einstein Distinguished Educator Fellow Michael Stewart and AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow Andrew Zidell. Earlier this year, Wanda and I met with the Committee on Equal Opportunity in Science and Engineering, CEOS, which Alicia serves as executive liaison. You can review a summary of this discussion in tab 4.4 of your diligent book. As a reminder, CEOS advises NSF on policies, programs, practices, and activities to encourage the full participation of women, underrepresented racial, ethnic populations, and persons with disabilities within all levels of the nation's STEM enterprise. So we're very much interested in hearing their thoughts. CEOS members offered a number of suggestions, including incorporating DEIA into the definition of intellectual merit, elevating broadening participation as an additional review criteria, increasing the diversity of program officers, and developing a mechanism for institutional accountability for DEIA goals. I want us to keep CEOS's suggestions in mind as we discuss broadening participation and DEIA as it relates to merit review processes and procedures. This is a big topic, and we certainly don't expect to cover everything in this hour, but I strongly believe that our examination would be incomplete if we didn't work to surface possible challenges and opportunities within merit review. As you're aware, CHIPS and Science Act has charged federal research agencies to assess and update policies and practices to, quote, remove or reduce cultural and institutional barriers limiting the recruitment, retention, and success of groups historically underrepresented in STEM research careers, including policies and practices relevant to the unbiased review of federal research applications. We do hope the Commission's work will contribute to the agency's regular assessment of merit review policies and practices. Because if you remember, the National Science Board established this commission in part because of enduring funding disparities, which are not unique to the NSF, of course. However, it is vitally important that our merit review policies and processes are fair and unbiased, particularly with respect to underrepresented people in STEM. Continuing our practice of commission members joining Wanda and me in guiding the conversation, today we will be asking board member Roger Beachy to lead our discussion. But before I turn it over to Roger, I'd like to welcome our NSF colleagues to today's discussion. Here to provide a broad agency perspective, we have Rhonda Davis, head of the Office of Equity and Civil Rights. Her office is responsible for responding to all civil rights matters pertaining to NSF programs or activities receiving federal financial assistance, including Title IX compliance activities. Charles Barber, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, who helps provide advice on policy oversight, guidance, and coordination of such matters within NSF. And Jean Feldman, Head of Policy Office in the Policy Office of Budget, Finance, and Award Management. Her office provides guidance on the interpretation of NSF policies and procedures, which is critical to our work. And here to provide directorate level perspectives, we have James Moore, Assistant Director of the Directorate for STEM Education, Sylvia Butterfield, Acting Assistant Director for the Directorate of Social Behavior and Economic Sciences, Lee Walker, Acting Deputy Director, Division Director for the Division of Social and Economic Sciences in SPE, Catalina Akim, Staff Associate in the Directorate for the Mathematical and Physical Sciences, and Program Director for the Launching Early Career Academic Pathways in mathematics and physical science, what we call LEAP MPS. Lisa Clow, Deputy Division Director in the Directorate of Geosciences, and Leslie Richler, Program Director for the Directorate of Biological Sciences, who heads the Safe and Inclusive Field Pilot Program for their directorate. And finally, Jeffrey Forbes, Program Director for the Division of Computer and Network Systems in the Directorate for Computer and Information Sciences and Engineering, SCIES. He leads SCIES's Education and Workforce Program. We're thrilled to have colleagues with hands-on experience with us today. This is something we have worked on organizing for several months, and we're delighted to hear from them. With that, I'd like to turn the conversation over to Roger to start us on what I anticipate will be a robust conversation. Roger.
Thanks very much, Steve, for the introduction and and I also am we're grateful, as Steve said, to all of you from the NSF to join us today, because we're really anxious to hear or interested in knowing your thoughts and inputs that you would have in this topic area. Now, the materials shared by the commission staff and Steve's introduction provide a foundation for the conversation that we'll have today. And I really want this to be a conversation. There's a lot of input that we know can be gathered from you all, as well as from other members of the committee. I'm glad to see all of you here to help us think this through. As Steve said, possible challenges and potential opportunities within our merit review policies and processes. In the next few minutes, I want us to think about how best to expand diversity, equity, inclusion, and access to STEM education, stimulate research and engineering, and in innovation in the NSF context. How can we do a better job? Are we doing as good a job as we can possibly do? What are the things that we can do from the policy perspective? What can be done within the agency that you'd like to recommend? Are we doing our best as scientists and as an agency to broaden participation? And are we doing our best to engage the broadest possible community in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics? The input of our NSF guests, as well as commission members, will become part of the conversation and becomes and part of our report on merit review that we're working on in the next 12 months. To start off, I will use some questions that were formulated by a variety of inputs to the commission and to the National Science Board, and would ask your engagement in as many or all of them that you'd like to put. So first, to the MRX commission members, as we think about DEIA and broader participation goals, what is your sense of the goals that should be factored into priorities in intellectual merit and in broader impacts when building grant award portfolios? How would you like to see the agency make what changes can you suggest? And what role should the goals for DEIE play in the context of the agency's job of goals of reviewing proposals, making awards, monitoring progress and awards, etc. What are your thoughts about what could be addressed? Many of you are grant awardees or have been. Are there things that you'd like to see based on your own experiences and what you know about the agency? Commission members? Kevon.
Thanks, Roger. I'm thinking back to one of our earliest commission meetings, and at that time I expressed the following thought, and this feels like the right time to express it again, and that is that the National Science Board has articulated a vision, and that vision has components to it that I think map on fairly directly to this question of DEIA and broadening participation goals within merit review. So taking one example, our missing millions theme and priority, right? I mean, I think conceptually, intellectually, if not procedurally, map very directly to this question. And what I expressed previously, and that I want to just kind of say again here, is I wonder if there's an opportunity to just more explicitly and intentionally align board priorities, board vision priorities, like missing millions, like talent development, into the merit review process more explicitly. So, for example, one way to do that might be to say, as part of merit review criteria, that there are multiple ways of addressing broader impacts, and broadening participation is, how would you say it? I don't know. Maybe I don't need to wordsmith it now, but that it is an especially high priority for the foundation and the board, given Vision 2030 and so on. And that's something that could be updated from time to time as themes and priorities and vision, adjust and shift and change. But I'll stop talking now. But I wonder if there's an opportunity here to create some real hooks and linkages between board vision and priorities and the merit review process vis-a-vis this question. I hope that made some sense.
It does. Thanks, Kayvon. I meant to mention the goals and statements and expectations that we had as we drafted Vision 2030, because certainly getting everyone that we can to engage in the challenge of science discovery and innovation and serving community will take all the, as we said at the time, all the best brains that we can find, and we want to cast that net as broadly as possible. And the importance of capturing what's in the missing millions or those that have not participated fully, it was certainly envisaged in 2030. So thanks for bringing that up. Julia, your hands up.
Yeah. Thanks very much. I support what Kayvon says. I think in general, the buckets that, as we've discussed previously, of the IM and the BI can include attention to DEIA, and being a bit more explicit about that probably makes a lot of sense. The other things that are just incredibly important, and I hate to sound like a broken record, but these are things like we discussed in the last MRX meeting about building the portfolio and making sure that this is one axis that one looks at as a portfolio is being assembled. It's also about, the whole culture of the place. What are the incentives to have, diverse sets of teams making proposals in the first place? I know in some recent years, I'm not sure about the current one, the proposals from the underrepresented groups, the numbers have actually gone down. And yes, clearly, if you don't have the proposals, then you can't make the decisions. And so are there incentives that can be provided to try to get those numbers up? In a rather different venue in which I'm working, trying to get more underrepresented groups, individuals considered for particular recognition, incentives to get those nominations in has made a big difference, because you can't select if they aren't in the system. So that's getting down into mechanisms, but that's it. How you constitute your review panels, how you monitor the conversations that go on in the review panels, how you constitute the program officers. I think that was, you already mentioned that, Roger. And finally, what's really important is, what are the goals? Those have to be stated very clearly. And I know in some of the material we were provided, some of those goals are stated, but the second is you absolutely have to be able to track against them. And where are we making progress? Where are we not making progress? Are there programs that are making progress and others that aren't? And if that's the case, why? And if you don't have the data, then you really can't, you don't know where you stand. So that's probably enough for one shot.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. The graph that you referred to on the declining numbers of applications that have come from HBCUs, MSIs, and so forth, was really sort of startling to all of us. And I think it goes counter to the goals that we had anticipated when we wrote 2030 map. And I getting to the bottom of that, understanding that better will help the board certainly to understand what's going on, and finding ways to remedy if there are ways that come out of this discussion and the CEOS discussions and others about how to make sure that decline is stopped. Other comments from the board? Specifically, we'll turn to the NSF in a second. Any other comments? Wanda, I'm surprised. There you are. Comments that you have?
I'm in listening mode. I'll comment before our session ends.
I'm sure you will. Thanks. Others? The point's been made that the board certainly anticipates that we will embrace the challenge of engaging those who are currently not participating as much as we possibly can. Of course, without jeopardizing the overall goals of the NSF, and there are ways to do that, and we need to find ways to make sure that we can happen. But let me turn then to the NSF. Is there anything that you feel in your role that supports or limits achievements of the broader participation goals in the portfolio? Do you see anything in what you've done or your mandate, your writ in your role that limits participation? This is where we hope to hear from you all. Leslie? Yes, please.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So one program that I've led over a few years is called Mid-Career Advancement. And that program started as a pilot in bio, but it's spread across parts of the agency. Parts of 5 directorates are involved. That program is focused on a part of the academic pipeline that is not the recruitment part, it's the retention and advancement part. And one thing that we've noticed is that the scientific community can be overwhelmed with the number of programs and solicitations that the agency has. That in and of itself can be a challenge for PIs to navigate, especially with this program, which is focused on sparking new achievement. It's focused on workforce development. It's broadening participation. It's making sure that people who have been overwhelmed with service and administrative responsibilities and outreach at that stage have the opportunity to do research. And those are principally women and underrepresented groups. We've seen double the percentage of women submitting to that program, many more underrepresented groups, lots of MSIs, et cetera. So it's a really positive program, I think, to get everybody back into research and doing productive research. But it would be really fantastic if, and it's difficult to get everyone to join. It would be wonderful if it was something like the Career Award that everyone knows about, and then it would be clear to the community and they could apply easily.
That was my next question to you, Leslie. I wasn't aware of, we knew of the program, but didn't hear of how it's working. So thank you very much. That's encouraging. Is there a mechanism through which members of the MSI and HBCUs and other groups can sort of link on or click on the website that says these are opportunities to engage more broadly? Is there a site for that? Alicia's is nodding, so I think the answer must be yes.
Well, so 2 places. One, we have a funding opportunity search engine that allows for you to filter based on broadening participation opportunities. And then we have an entire page for broadening participation on the website that we have started to create specialized sort of go-to here if you are looking for opportunities with specialized for Native Americans or persons with disabilities or women or whatever. So we keep working on building out that content. And so that serves as a one-stop shop to see not only programs of funding, but awards and the progress that we're making.
And it tracks progress. So you can easily find.
So we are
so that
working
those
on
who go to
some.
that site can see that this program is making a difference.
Yeah, well, program by program, not necessarily specifically, but it gives links to those programs so that you can find that information. Usually the CIOS reports roll up a lot of the impacts that go across a number of different programs.
Thank you, Alicia. And Catalina put in a link just then on the chat box. Thank you very much, both of you. Lisa?
Thank you, Roger, and great to be here with everyone today. I want to highlight a new program across GEO. We call it GEO Embrace. It's GEO Empowering Broader Academic Capacity and Education, and it is brand new. The first round of proposals just came in about a week ago. What we are trying to target, officially it's non-R1, but the solicitation is very careful at calling out that we're looking to invite others into the GEO community. We do have research intensive non-R1s. That's not who we're trying to target. So there's actually two tracks within the GEO Embrace solicitation. They're small awards, but they're actually cognizant of capacity. There's a track 1 award for $200,000, but we only want to see an 8-page proposal. So really building up the community, getting them ready to be able to do impactful GEO research. And then there is a growth track that is up to $400,000, and it is you can take all 15 pages if you want, but we will be reviewing these separately from our core proposal solicitations. We will be paying very careful attention to all of the reviewers, and we're really excited about this. As you guys know, the geosciences have been specifically called out for not being a diverse community. So this has been a really impactful, I would say, or we're waiting to see. Like I said, proposals are just in hands. We did a lot of virtual office hours to get the community aware of the opportunity, and it was a pretty robust response. And we're looking forward to seeing where it takes us. So
that sounds very promising. Thanks, Lisa. Kathleen?
I would like to comment about efforts at NSF to ensure that institutional knowledge about the funding, both opportunities and processes, is not limiting potential applicants from institution. For example, NSF has a funding opportunity called Granted, and I am going to put the link in the chat. And that is an opportunity where focused on the development of research administration and management. One can imagine that R1 institutions with centuries history of research and plugged immediately into funding opportunities have such a system much more developed than entry institutions new to the funding process. So that is one of the things. And I want to make a second comment that broader impacts can be achieved, as NSF states in its documents upon advice from NSB, by the research itself, by activities related to the research, and also by activities that are complementary to the research. So broadening participation in DIEA are a group within this larger umbrella of broader impacts. They are always reviewed based our 2 merit review criteria, but there can be solicitations that bring solicitation-specific criteria, and those can be related to broadening participation. So for example, in MPS, we have postdoctoral fellowships where the applicants and the awardees have a plan for how they will contribute to broadening participation, and the IEA to strengthen the pipeline and to make sure that we have increased diversity in the fundamental sciences and mathematics.
Okay, thanks, Catalina. Well, that's good to hear that it's more, it goes beyond just the program itself, but encouraging those who are PIs to make it their goal to end broader impacts, which I mean to ensure broader access. That's one of the questions that we had raised actually. How do we expect PIs to act? Thanks, James.
Well, first of all, thank you all for asking these questions, and I think they're very important. And I think working with you all, we can certainly come up with something that we can be more impactful. If you recollect, when I presented to the board, EDU, when you think about HBCUs, just in general, you know, from 2011 to 2023, you know, 52% of the awards that went to HBCUs came from EDU. And you see these high numbers, but we have programs that specifically focus on certain institutional types, like HBCUs, Hispanic serving institutions, as well as tribal institutions. But when you look at the numbers, they're very high. And some of it is, let me just say, what I've heard, these are anecdotes, and that I'm trying to get at some of these numbers from what I've heard from chancellors, vice chancellors, faculty members, et cetera, from these institutional types. They feel that these kinds of programs understand their institutions. And not only that, that the bar is not raised. And I can say I've been a program officer, so I can say I've been on a program office where I've seen people who come from those kind of institutions and the proposal was better than places like where I work. And people would swear that they couldn't do what they proposed. And I've seen with places like where I work, where there lots of gaps in the proposal because they knew that investigator, people will fall on the sword saying that that person can do it. So there are inherent biases when you put certain institutions in the same pool with everyone. And they play out oftentimes. No matter, most of us, most of our program officers, we do an implicit bias exercise with our panelists. But I would say that I can't speak broadly today, but when I was a program officer, I would say some program officers have specific biases around certain institutions as well. The other challenge that we have, because these, and I'm gonna quote one of our program officers when we present to HBCUs, we tell them that we don't want the HBCU Up program to be the sole program, but we like to see it as it's one door to get to the other doors. And so what I've found that we have to work on, that we're beginning to do in EDU with other directorates, because we're a cross-cut directorate. And I'll use this as an example of a change to try to get at broadening participation. The CREST program is a program to move minority serving institutions, HBCUs and Hispanics, to the new frontier. So we fund about $5 million. In the new solicitation, we're going to fund more. We're going to increase the amount from 5 million to 7.5 million. Some of this, A&T, as I noted in the board, is the only HBCU to graduate from a CREST center to get an ERC. And when I mean graduate, that they're the sole leader, that we have a HBCU as a leader. And we haven't had another institution to do that since that. But what I've discovered when I talked to the program officers, that it wasn't a lot of cross-pollination with the traditional directors. How do we get these PIs in collaboration or in the same room with PIs at the major Research One institutions? And so we're working. So what we have done, you will see multiple DCLs in collaboration with engineering, creating a CREST center that focus on engineering. We collaborated with Sylvia's team and SBE. We've never done that because we're trying to get our PIs connected so they won't solely see this one stop. And the last thing I'll say, because I'm a behavioral scientist and this is what I do, and I saw it at Ohio State, whomever that you come in contact with that help you the most, you go to that person always until that person bridge the gap and connect you with other people. And so this is a mechanism I think we need to do more. I'm not saying we don't do it to kind of bring communities together. We need to even think about transforming our PI meetings that they're not solely about a program, that is more connectivity around research lines, that we have PI meetings that bring people around research. To me, that's what convergence is.
Yeah,
It's not so
James,
much distance. So I'll stop there.
I know, James, is that, so you think that's a role that the NSF should play or that institutions should play? I mean, you gave Ohio State as an example. Is that something you'd like to see more at universities or more come at the agency level?
I would say both and. I think NSF, we shape behaviors.
Yes, you
at
do.
Institutions. People tend to align with the funding sources. So I think
Yes.
NSF can play a role. What that role is and how far we go, it will be up to you all. But I'm just saying, these are the things that we've done in EDU to kind of respond, and we're going to do more of it. It just can't be, we're going to do outreach. It got to be some really creative outreach that we can connect with these communities. And let me just say this one thing, if I may, Roger, and I will shut up.
Sure, no, please.
We went to West Virginia, which was transformative because the president there is my former president of Ohio State. He said, hey, NSF got to come. And I told him, we'll come if you host for the whole state. This is what one person said when we came to West Virginia. They said, we are so appreciative that NSF thought of West Virginia enough that they would come and spend this much time with us. And so that tells me if we want to reach communities that we haven't reached before, I'm gonna go back to what my mom said, and she worked in social service. You got to spend time with people if you want to help people. And that's what I think is very important, because some communities, some of these institutions, they don't have the infrastructure. It takes a lot of effort, not to say it doesn't take a lot of effort at other institutions, to actually get a submission. And then when they don't get it or they don't get the quality feedback, it dampens their psyche in ways that they say they don't want to try again.
Yeah.
So I'll shut up.
No, you're
Thank
covering, you've gotten us into areas of the discussion that was sort of farther down on the list, but you've addressed issues that are policy issues. They're organizational issues within the agency. How do program officers act? How do they recognize implicit bias or uncharacterized bias or unintended bias in reviews? Those are all important pieces, James, and I'm glad that you were you put those out in front, because that's the kind of things that makes everyone aware of what could be done and appreciated. Erica?
Thank you very much. So I just wanted to maybe provide a little bit more context. Julia started off with sort of introducing an element of diversity, namely institutional diversity. James just touched briefly on geographic diversity, and just to, when we think about portfolio balance at NSF, and we've had this conversation before, it's a multidimensional way of viewing, what of all of the facets that we are trying to balance. And diversity is a very important facet that is considered through the portfolio balance process. That said, even diversity itself is multifaceted and complex. And so just as a little example of that, we talked about maybe trends in institution level participation. Those trend lines don't carry forward when looking at geographic participation. Those same trend lines don't apply when considering the participation of underrepresented minorities in terms of who is submitting proposals. So for example, when we look at who submits proposals to NSF right now and has been over the last 10 plus years, what we see is that, in general, there is growth among PIs and co-PIs from underrepresented minority groups. Now, many of those groups are quite small. And we also see a very
significant decline in the participation of white men. So it's a very complex picture of diversity that I think we have data that people are looking at and considering and trying to figure out how to balance and manage all of those sort of competing dynamics that are being faced by program officers and leadership at NSF when making decisions.
Thanks, Erica. Appreciate it. Lee? We have time for a few more. There's a lot of questions that we had, but this is such a good discussion. I hate to move us to any other topic area. Lee?
So, Roger, I wanted to just add a couple of things about policy and actually how policy kind of interacts with
Yes, please. That's good.
solicitation specific criteria or with a program description, right? So what happens for a lot of proposals that are submitted, they might fall between the cracks of the way a review panel is reviewing a proposal for a specific program. And so that program then will kind of interact to what they see as intellectual merit in that particular field or area, right? So what happens is when someone puts in a proposal that is kind of more interdisciplinary or even more use inspired, it might fall outside of the area where that description is, right? So SBE has Build and Broaden, which Build and Broaden has kind of solved a bit of that problem in that Build and Broaden is kind of more open to interdisciplinary research, right? So when it falls into, comes out of an institution that is a minority serving institution and it's interdisciplinary, it can kind of target the research area that it's in, but it all, as long as it's in a social behavior economic science area, but it's also kind of based the merit on this broader, more interdisciplinary kind of research, then meeting the other specific criteria of the particular program. And thereby it kind of broadens the research areas that can fall into that focus. And that's worked really well, I think, for SBE in kind of picking up some of the research that doesn't fall neatly in a specific program area. So that's been really useful. And it is, kind of the policy of review criteria that we have is kind of augmented by the specific solicitation criteria that allows for a kind of more broader base of research to come in.
So Lee, are you saying that there is the flexibility within reviews that allows those kind of
well, it's still
to be reviewed in the context of a more narrowly focused call?
That's correct. That's exactly right, Roger. That's what I was just certainly say. Yes.
Thank you very much. That's good to know. That's a question I had in my own mind. Sylvia?
Yes, thank you. And I'm going to build on some of the comments that my colleagues have made and tag on to Lee's mention of the Build and Broaden program. And that was developed in SBE, and it's been very successful for a number of reasons that I want to point out. The criteria for Build and Broaden in terms of PI submission is that all proposals must come from PI, principal investigators, who are at a minority serving institution or from PIs who are partnering with researchers at a minority serving institution. But no matter how the proposal is structured, at least half of the funding must go to the MSI. So this has been very effective in SBE. As Lee mentioned, we've seen steady growth in MSI support, and that may be due in part to a number of things, some of which that have been mentioned. We have guidelines that are focusing on institutions that target MSI. So a number of people have noted, and I think this was something you mentioned in your question about the fact that MSIs know that they're being in the review process, they are competing with other MSIs institutions that have comparable levels of resources. The other thing I want to point out is that this program is similar to a lot of programs targeting MSIs that are outside of the great programs within EDU. EDU is my home directorate, and I applaud all the things that James said. So in addition to the HBCU Up and the Tribal College program and others, there are programs within the other RNRAs, research directorates, that have these type of criteria that are designed specifically to support MSIs. And sometimes it's raising the awareness, building capacity, and that those are things that I think Alicia mentioned. There's this broadening participation homepage that lists all of these opportunities, and granted is designed to help build capacity at MSIs who may not be ready to start with a center level program. They have to build their capacity first. But there are, of course, some who are ready to start with the $15-20 million program. But so I just want to point out that NSF has options for both. And then a number of people have mentioned outreach. Extensive outreach, specially designed outreach definitely makes a huge difference. With Build and Broaden, we have brought in a number of individuals who've never applied to NSF. Because this program fits their needs specifically, as was mentioned, and then collaborations with the other research directors. A lot of these programs, while the lead directorate is listed, such as Build and Broaden, we may be collaborating with engineering, with geosciences, et cetera. And so we're reaching, not only are we reaching the social science community, but we're also reaching individuals in those disciplinary directorates who are seeking funding to support work that may have a social science component to it. So, you know, sometimes the combination of those things will really be effective in doing exactly what it is that you all are interested in, making sure that we are reaching these communities where we've seen somewhat of decline in submissions, and tailoring the needs of the programs to meet the needs within the institutions and the communities that they serve.
Thanks very much, Sylvia. And there are lots of these other questions that come up because of this, and I'm wondering if I can take the lead on a couple of questions here. Wanda, I see your hand up, and I'll come to you. But they really relate to this issue of how we classify or quantify. Are we quantifying access through these multi-institutional awards as well, to make sure that we're tracking if there is a major R1 that's a lead? Are we tracking well enough all the participants within that award to make sure that we can account for the additional resources that go to the MSIs and the HBCUs and the others? Are we doing a pretty good job of subcataloging? When I was at NIFA, I had the same attitude about how do we make sure that not only it goes, but we recognize that it goes to these other places, whether they're the lead institution or a secondary or tertiary. Those are all positive pieces, and we want to capture all of that data. So I assume that we're doing that at the NSF in a much larger organization than NIFA was. So I'm really pleased to see that an organization the size of this one has taken this on, and I'd like to. I hope we can get this over to the NIH as well. I mean, you know, that's the value of what we're trying to do here. Wanda, would you have a comment and question?
I do. I do. Thank you, Roger, and thank all of the NSF colleagues who've taken this valuable time to meet with the commission today. We simply realize that the greatest dollar investments that NSF makes in all of these awards reside and are led by most of your directorates, and that a number of program-specific criteria come from your directorates, divisions, et cetera. And so it's very good to engage with you directly, and we deeply appreciate the time that you're spending with us to do so. I have just a couple of questions, and I agree with Roger, the richness of what all of you have shared with us thus far. One of the things that we have heard in the course of our deliberations, including CIOS, but elsewhere as well, is considering how broadening participation can be included and considered as a part of intellectual merit. Most of the time when people think about broadening participation, they immediately think about broader impacts. We have, for example, the science of broadening participation that I believe SBE leads and oversees. And so clearly, there's an important role for the consideration of the value of broadening participation being considered seriously as a part of intellectual merit itself. And then a very different question that perhaps Leslie can provide some insight. I don't know. I've been intrigued by the pilot that Bio has done regarding safe and healthy research environments. And any insights, especially, given current issues we're facing, would be insightful. What I find especially intriguing about this is that this issue is considered at the front end, if you will, i.e. through the merit review process itself, and it could shed some important light for our deliberation.
Thank you. Julia? Oh, sorry, do we have any response from the NSF to Wanda's comments?
Hey, sir, it's Chuck Barber, your Chief
Hi,
Diversity
Chuck.
Officer.
Yeah.
And again, thank you for the time today. I apologize I didn't get to engage with the NSB at the recent NSB meeting, but I'll look forward to future conversations at other NSB iterations. Wanda, I'll just say I agree with you about the broadening participation as its own criterion, whether we look at how you weave it into intellectual merit or it's standalone as its own criterion. I know I've had a lot of conversations with VPs of research, also with program officers here, and in a lot of cases, it seems like broadening participation and broadening impacts are conflated, and so I think being able to split those out, I think that's absolutely a great idea. I would probably also take it a step further and even consider looking at broadening participation as more of a longer term metric, and then think about all the good work that's taking place here at NSF. How can we quantify increased outreach, and how can we quantify increased engagement as near-term metrics? Because I think we have a really good story to tell about all the good work that's kind of taking place here. So I just wanted to kind of jump in and just offer that perspective. And I'll also share, when I think about why broadening participation should be more of a long-term metric, I think we have to look at DEIA as the outcome and not just the process. I think when we make it about the process, I think we kind of get stuck with just remedy work instead of that structural work that needs to take place to really get to those outcomes that we want to get to. So I just wanted to just jump in and offer those thoughts.
Thanks, Jack. There were a whole bunch of questions around the CHIPS and Science Act and also the mandate that's there that we're not going to be able to cover because we spent some time here. But I think this has been such a worthwhile conversation. Julia?
Yeah, and thanks, that was a great lead into some of what I wanted to say. We had quite a bit of material to go through for this meeting, and I was particularly taken by that section from the Academy's report on advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in the leadership of completed space missions. So not specifically about NSF, obviously. However, there were some findings and conclusions that I think pertain to NSF, and these include things like setting the tone at the top of an organization and how important that is, and cascading it on down. From personal experience, I remember with one employer, 2 sister organizations that had a completely different culture. And you could trace that directly to the individual who was in charge in both of those. One of them was far more welcoming of a diverse set of thoughts, approaches, and people than the other. And it just made a huge difference. The second is the need to really be clear about what the goals are overall, probably for the foundation. And there is such a plethora of programs. I mean, I can't even pretend to know what even a decent fraction of them are by their acronyms. What is the overall goal for the agency? How do the individual programs fit into that goal and lead towards that goal, contribute? And, there's a lot of cross correlation and so forth. And finally, this business, and this is getting to what Chuck was talking about, tracking progress against goals. You have the end goal, but then you have these steps along the way, because we are so far from where we want to be. How are the individual programs and within the individual directorates, et cetera, how do they all roll up to show progress against the goal and whether we are in fact making progress? And the last thing is, how are PIs held accountable for the commitments that they make in their proposals, particularly in DEIA, since that's what we're talking about today. And what are the consequences if they don't? Because there were certainly comments in other parts of the reading about how that is definitely a weak link as well. I'm done.
Thank you. We're down to about 4.5 minutes. Leslie?
Just really briefly to respond to Wanda's comment about the safe and inclusive fieldwork pilot. This is not just in bio, this is bio and geo. Lisa Clow is co-chair. She's here. Jean Feldman is in policy. She's here. They can speak up about this. It is something that we are quite concerned about, harassment and inclusion in environments like the fields where they can be particularly sensitive. So those are 2-page supplementary documents that are required by PIs that submit to solicitations that are a part of the pilot. And we have around 10 different solicitations that are a part of the pilot right now. And I'm happy to talk more about that with you later or follow up, or Jean, if you have something to say, or Lisa.
No, I think you handled it very nicely, Lisa, and I think this discussion has raised some hot topics, if you will, for some areas where it really would be good to invest some energy in, and that has to do really with BP versus BI, BP versus intellectual merit. I think even within the foundation there, it is handled differently, for example. So I think greater discussion on how that should be treated would certainly be worthwhile. And I think that many of the things we're doing with respect to the pilot that has been already mentioned is valuable in that we designed it specifically so that we could evaluate it and assess whether this was the right approach or whether a different approach, like having a certification from the authorized organizational representative, is the best way to approach it. So there's a lot of really rich discussion here, and I'm happy to have been able to engage. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I go to turn to Kathleen for a second, for Steve, I apologize, but I'm in a place where I didn't bring my power cord, and it's going to go out in a bit. So if I'll do my best, maybe to come in by phone later. Catalina?
Just a quick comment about the NSF by the numbers website, and NSF puts together data that can be analyzed by the public. And of course, this reflects internal standards, speaking to Julia's consideration of specific measures. Now, many others could be there, but this is, reflecting clearly where we are and how we evolve along many coordinates of PI applicants and proposals.
Thank you very much. We are, before I lose my power here, we're in a time in politics where DEIA is not a favorite topic. And we're going to face institutions that we serve through our universities who are under continued scrutiny. It may behoove the agency to ensure that there are metrics and that we have measurements and metrics in place that demonstrate what we need to demonstrate to keep our mission going.
I think we just lost Roger. Roger, are you with us? Okay. Well, I thank him in absentia. He did a wonderful job of leading us forward. Are there any other comments before we close? Okay, well, thank you all for a very productive conversation. It's been a rich discussion, and the information you've shared with us today has been invaluable. We think we've surfaced a few areas to look into as we consider and continue our examination. For those of you watching on YouTube live stream, we welcome your general suggestions and inquiries. Please contact us at meritreviewcommission@nsf.gov. And to learn more about activities regarding this reexamination, visit nsf.gov/NSB. This is our last open meeting of the calendar year, and I want to again express my gratitude to both the staff and members of the commission as we transition into developing our preliminary recommendations and suggestions to present to the board. I anticipate that we will have a few more open meetings and invite the public to tune in the future. Thank you again for a productive meeting today.
Steve, this is Roger. I wanted to add my appreciation to all those who so willfully entered. I'd like us to think again of how this compares with what's required in the CHIPS and Science Act, and any comments that you all might have with regard to the CHIPS and Science, please forward them on to Steve and us, and we will consider those as well. Sorry, Steve.
No, thank you. And thank you for a great job leading that discussion.
It wasn't hard.
Good. Well, this concludes our business for today. The open meeting is adjourned at 12:56. We will resume in just a moment.